This is Tom Kozlik, the head of Public Policy and Municipal Strategy at HilltopSecurities. Thank you everyone for joining us today for this newest episode of our HilltopTalks Politics and Finance podcast series for 2025. During these HilltopTalks podcast discussions, we speak with subject matter experts about topics that intersect the worlds of politics and finance at the federal, state, and local levels in the United States. We often concentrate on issues related to U.S. public finance and the U.S. municipal bond market. Today, Yaffa Rattner from HilltopSecurities and I are going to discuss the results of the HilltopSecurities Public Finance Leaders Survey for 2025. There are over 1,000 public finance leaders from different public entities across the nation who participated in this survey. We published the results of this survey at our website, and I've also tweeted and posted the results on LinkedIn. So if you haven't seen them, please take a look. But Yaffa and I had about a 60+ minute discussion about the results from this survey. I think that you're all going to find it very, very interesting. So thank you for joining us today.
Good day, and welcome to the second annual Public Finance Leader Survey by HilltopSecurities. My name is Yaffa Rattner. I am head of Municipal Credit here at Hilltop. I'm joined by my friend and my partner, Tom Kozlik, head of Public Policy and Municipal Strategy. HilltopSecurities launched this initiative in 2024 because we believe, as a leading municipal investment banking firm, we are deeply focused on understanding the priorities of public finance leaders. We want to know the issues that are on the top of their mind and where Hilltop can play a meaningful role in supporting the implementation of these objectives. This year's survey includes 7 targeted, insightful questions, followed by 2 demographic questions. We are pleased to share that we've received over 1,000 responses from leaders in every state, representing municipalities, counties, utilities, states, special districts, including healthcare, higher ed, transportation, and economic development. We received the most responses from 4 states, which would include Texas, Florida, California, and Massachusetts. And you'll notice that if you go on the electronic version of the survey, you can click each of the states to see how answers and profiles may change depending upon which state they reside in. Our aim for today's conversation is to unpack the responses with thoughtful context and insight from Tom, who brings extensive research experience on the intersection of these critical topics. Okay, I'm now going to start with the first question. I will read the question, provide some brief overview, and then ask Tom to jump in with his thoughts. The first question is, what are the biggest challenges facing your public entity in 2025? We asked responders to choose 4 answers out of 14 potential solutions. You'll notice that the top 4 items were labor and staffing, budget and pension, infrastructure, and federal legislative changes. Remember before I mentioned that you can look at the different states to see how the responses changed depending upon location? I'll point out that infrastructure truly remained number 3 in Texas and California, but in Florida and Massachusetts, it's interesting to note that federal legislation changes actually were number 3. We're not surprised that leaders responding to this question really chose labor, staffing, and budget and pension as their primary issues, because at the end of the day, the leaders are charged with providing essential services, and how are they going to do that without labor and without the funds to pay for that labor? So Tom, I know you've done tremendous research on this subject, and maybe you'd like to take a few moments and elaborate on how these results either compare or contrast with some of your publications.
Yeah, I think that Phil, thanks, Yaffa. Thanks very much, and it's great to be here talking with you. I think that we were able to uncover a decent amount of what it is that's going on behind the scenes with public entities across the nation as a result of the results from this survey. I think that it doesn't surprise me that labor and staffing is still not just up there, but the number one challenge from what it is that I can tell. And I think that that is a theme that is going to continue to evolve as over the last couple of years, one of the issues seemed to be, as far as I could tell, were labor and staffing issues, especially at the local government level, where coming out of COVID, it was difficult for many public entities to find folks. And when I say many public entities, there are a lot of differences here because there are differences that smaller local governments and school districts are challenged with, right? Because they are very, very staff heavy. And I think that the challenges that they were facing 2, 3 years ago are evolving. I think that, while work from home, remote work is still something that a lot of organizations are trying to figure out how it is that, and in some cases, it could be a good theme and impact an organization in a positive way, and then other situations it's negative. One of the things that I've heard, over the years is that as some private companies have increased their ability to allow folks to work from home, that enables folks in different geographic regions to compete, and it's oftentimes difficult for governments and public entities to compete with private firms with regard to pay and or perks if they are if remote work is something that's really continuing to penetrate, which I think it is. That being said, one of the themes that is now starting to really have an impact on labor, I think, is not just generative AI, but kind of this AI wave in general. And I think that that's something that it's not going to surprise me, Yaffa, if and when next year we do this survey, the results are somewhat similar. But I think that one of the things that's going to evolve is the underlying reasons of why labor and staffing continue to be a challenge in years to come. I think that that's going to evolve. Let me make one more point, because as you alluded to when you were setting me up for this, I appreciate it. The fact that budget and pensions have risen and are very close to the number one issue or challenge with regard to the public finance leaders who participate in the survey. It doesn't surprise me that budget and pension challenges, and I'm really more thinking that it's the budget, not necessarily the pensions, because I think the pension stress, relatively speaking, to kind of 10-ish years ago or before the COVID crisis, I think the pension stress is a little less than what it was. I think that one of the big reasons of why this category is so high is because public entities, especially state and local governments and public entities that got a decent amount of fiscal help in 2021, 22, and 2023, I think that is rolling off now. And one of the things that I've been describing over the last 2 years in the work that I've been doing while talking to our public entity clients and our investor clients is that there's a normalization of credit that's going on, where state and local governments, other public entities are having to look at their budget now, and they're balancing their ongoing spending with ongoing revenues. And I think that that's something that's it's not just going to happen in this budget cycle, but over the next kind of budget cycle 2 or 3. I think that process is going to continue to work itself out. That being said, overall economic growth has still been pretty strong this year. So that's something that I think is going to help from a credit perspective. But how it is that public entities kind of normalize their credit profiles and normalize their spending, I think is going to be one of the big issues from a credit perspective to look through into future budget cycles. One of the other things, is that it's also not surprising me that either infrastructure generally is so high and or infrastructure specific or related themes are also all over the challenges bar chart, right? So that doesn't surprise me either. Was there anything that surprised you that came up in this challenges question?
I think the surprise was frankly the lack of surprise.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, you think about labor and staffing, generally that's 2/3 of a municipality's
right.
budget. It might be significantly more for K-12, where you may be paying more to teachers and support staff there. So clearly it's your number one expense item. And as you correctly articulated, a lot of the COVID funds have at this point been fully expended, and therefore in order to maintain budget stability, you're going to have to rely upon recurring revenues and recurring expenses. In the current environment in which grant funding, both at a federal and state level, can be in jeopardy, and in more jeopardy depending upon the sector in which the service is being provided. All eyes are on how are you doing? Are you at structural balance? Do recurring revenues meet or exceed recurring expenses? Labor, as I mentioned before, your primary expenditure source, regardless of what unit of government you're in, is going to be an item of key focus. In your comment earlier, you had mentioned about the potential synergy between labor and AI, and I was chuckling a little bit because I didn't know that you hadn't finished your comment, and I'm like, he's giving us the perfect segue into question 2, which is going to talk about, are you using artificial intelligence in your role, and talking about potential leveraging and opportunities that may come as a result. So before we officially jump to question number 2, Tom, did you have any other thoughts or observations that you wanted to share?
I wanted to ask you one more question about the
Sure.
challenges. Yeah, because one of the issues that's been a big topic this year is the uncertainty with regard to federal policy. And number 4 and number 6, number 4 on challenges is the federal legislative changes. Number 6 is the social and political environment. And I have had many conversations on the entity and on the investor side, especially with regard to what what pressures might occur as a result of either tariffs specifically or especially lower federal aid across the state and local government kind of public entity space. And so I was wondering if you were surprised that number 4 and number 6 weren't higher, or if you think that was kind of an appropriate level for the folks that participated in this survey.
Yeah, I mean, I almost wonder if we should have collapsed 4 and 6 into one,
Into
and
one,
then
right?
perhaps if we did, it would basically eclipse labor and staffing. So it's a
Right.
really interesting observation, one that we could think about for the 3rd annual
Yeah.
leaders survey result. And again, we continue to tinker with the questions as well as the responses, and we encourage any feedback from our participants or from just people that are looking and reading through the survey results, because we'd love to do, take the survey even to a higher level next year.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, if you combine those 2 numbers, it becomes predominant. So I'm not particularly surprised that it fell to 4 and 6. I think the issues completely interplay with each other. We have a situation in which federal funding and state funding may be in flux. And we have a situation in which labor is a challenge. And we have the overall rubric in which our public sector leaders are working, in which they've spent a lot of the one-time revenues that they've received in COVID and immediately thereafter. And the eye is focused on recurring revenues and recurring expenses to be able to deliver essential services in a stable fiscal environment.
Right.
Any other thoughts, Tom, that we wanted to share before we go to question 2?
The last thing I was just thinking about is,
Sure.
on the one hand, how many of these themes are ongoing themes that public entities need to manage. On the other hand, and as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about what's different now in 2025 compared to kind of 2018, 2019. Like, what is it that's changed and or changed significantly? We were just talking about the political federal backdrop that's absolutely changed. Infrastructure and budget. I mean, those were common themes before COVID, but then there are so many other things like rising costs of insurance, cybersecurity, AI. There are so many other new pressure points and themes and challenges that are on top of the things that we were seeing kind of in the last decade, right? So that's kind of my final takeaway from the challenges that public entities are dealing with.
Yeah, I think that's enormously well said, Tom. And I think that when we read through the rest of the questions, that
Yeah,
observation, cybersecurity, resilience, just these types of issues and AI are going to
yeah,
be really important, and they'll bleed through the concepts that we're going to try to discuss. So as we
right.
think specifically about, and let's head to question number 2 now, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
You know, are you using artificial intelligence in your role? So I'm going to just share a personal vignette as far as I'm concerned. Um, if you would have asked me this exact question last year, I would have said no, right? My job cannot be done by any element of artificial intelligence. And what has evolved, frankly, over the last 12 months is my ability to utilize certain components of AI in my everyday function. And it doesn't make it, for at least at this point, a situation in which an entity or a person needs to be replaced. But as I've integrated and incorporated it, it theoretically just makes me better. For example, it could help me research faster a particular topic, or it could help me polish some written materials a little bit faster, as opposed to me sitting and worrying about my particular word choice. There are times in which I could just write an article or an investment thesis and then put it into AI and say, do it better. And it does, which is a little bit demeaning and enthralling all at the same time. But the point is, to your concluding comments with respect to question number 1, there are new challenges and new
mhm,
opportunities that we've identified in Q1, in question 1 specifically, that would not necessarily have made the grade in 2024, and certainly not have been incorporated in 2018. And I think the question of artificial intelligence is absolutely front and center on that topic.
mhm.
So let's talk a minute or two about the specific answers. 54% of our responders replied they are not using AI, which to me is, is not particularly surprising given, my personal confession as to where I was a year ago. And the remainder is using AI in some capacity. But it's interesting because even using it in some capacity, just a small fraction, let's call it about 17%, is actually using it daily, with a larger number using it monthly, and a larger number using it weekly. So actually, I think that number is actually 13%, not 17%. Let me correct myself there. So, I mean, maybe Tom, I'll throw it over to you and maybe take a moment and talk about your own experience with AI, and your general observations with respect to how you think it could actually help public service leaders maximize their time and efficiency.
Yeah, and I'd say what the first observation that I'm going to make, Yaffa, is that I think that 13% that's using it daily and 16% that's using it weekly, I think that these when we do this, if we include this question next year or something like it, these numbers are only going to rise, because I think that, as you just described, my experience has been more over kind of a 2.5 year period, where now I am using it every day, and I've probably been using it every day for the past 6 or 9 months. And and also, one of the things that I wanted to do too is that, we when we're talking about artificial intelligence, we're talking. Correct me if I'm wrong, Yaf, but what you're referring to is generative AI products like ChatGPT, or using ChatGPT, or accessing it using Copilot. I mean, so we're talking about generative AI. And I think and one of the things that I wanted to say also is that these numbers that we're seeing for public finance, these numbers are a little higher than what the general public's usage is, which I'm not surprised about that. I'm not surprised that there are folks in public finance that are out ahead of what it is that the general public is doing. And as far as what it is that I'm using generative AI for on a regular basis, I guess the first thing I want to say and acknowledge is, as I talk to folks, I hear a lot of as I talk to folks about how they're using generative AI, and even for me, it's frustrating sometimes. I don't know. Are you frustrated sometimes with it, Yaffa?
It's it's a really important question, Tom, and
Yeah.
here's what ends up happening, because I like to use AI in the form of, let's say, ChatGPT or Copilot, particularly as research, right? And it could speed along the research process pretty nicely, and it gives you some good thoughts with respect to potential layouts or paths to go down. But as you look specifically at the data can be very much incorrect, and you need, and I kid you not, and right, and
Oh
it's
no.
so it's just
I'm good.
you can say, well, the calculator gave me the right answer, but if you put it in the wrong buttons, right, the answer is going to be incorrect. And you have to be super careful with respect to any form of artificial intelligence to make sure that you're not getting ahead of yourself, or the computer's not getting ahead of you, and that your data, in fact, is correct. So, Copilot, ChatGPT can make mistakes. It will make mistakes. You can yell at it. It doesn't get angry with you, but it could be incredibly frustrating when you know you're right and it can't find you the data. So, I don't mean, I'm a little bit tongue in cheek. A year ago, I was barely using it. 9 months ago, to your point, maybe I was using it monthly, maybe a couple times a month. At this point, I find a use for it almost every day. Where I do think it's super, frankly, is in polishing up research, or something that I've written, and I don't have to take the time for me to choose the absolute best word. I could say to fix it up. Sometimes I don't agree with its grammar. I don't agree with the word choice, but it's a good, nice editor that didn't require another hour of my time. So I feel like, from my perspective as a credit analyst, it's a value add. It's not a value replace. And especially with the concept of value replace, at least at this point, in 2025, I'm still smarter than it. I can still tell bad data from good data. So I feel that appropriately managed, it's an incredibly useful tool that can provide efficiencies within the day to day, but it has to be perceived and utilized as one tool in the toolbox. And for me, and my approach is not replacing human capital, but an enhancement to human capital, which is a positive. I think it's a positive tool right now. What's your thought, Tom?
Yeah, it depends on what I'm trying to get it to help me with. In general, what I say to folks is that I find that it's probably wrong 50 to 75% of the time that I ask it to help me with something. Part of that has to do with what it is that I ask it to help me with oftentimes, and the fact that it just I think that what it has to do with is that what it is that I'm asking it to help me with, there are kind of the themes and or topics there aren't necessarily specific answers for yet, right?
Sure.
And generative AI is really helpful in programming, in accounting, in law, in math. Those are all areas where they're kind of closed systems that really have a lot of specific answers, right? And so when I'm either going through and trying to do research or I've got a thesis that I'm trying to kind of flush things out, it can help to a degree. But even then, I find that if I ask it to do something specific, I can't get away from the fact that it's just wrong 50 to 75% of the time. And what I've learned is that there are certain things that I just don't spend the time to ask it to help me with, because I actually just get more frustrated with it because so well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that that human element is still that human element of inquiry and creating a thesis and doing whether it be specific research specific to topic A, topic B, topic C. That's still very, very important, and I'm sure it will get better as time goes on. But for right now, there are just certain things that I wish I could ask it to help. I wish it could help me with better, and so I'm very interested to find out if and when 6 months from now, 12 months from now, I will be able to have this discussion with you, and it'll be, and I won't say 50 to 75. Hopefully, I'll say 25 to 50. Then at some point, only 0 to 25. Right. So that's what I'm expecting and hoping. But right now, there are just some things that I'd like it to help me with, but it just can't yet, just because I don't think the technology is just not there.
Well, that's a great comment, because what the takeaway there is that ultimately it's not looking to replace your job, it's looking to enhance your job.
Right.
Maybe we revisit this question next year where,
Yeah.
to your point, it's developed more fulsome answers and capabilities, and we will continue to revisit. I do think that the conclusion ultimately is AI is here to stay and continue to learn to do better and be better. It'll push us as analysts, as leaders, in a very similar way. So I just think it's an exciting question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really, to me, a reflection. We didn't include this on our survey last year, and that's just, for example, the giant leap forward that this very important tool has made between 2024 and 2025.
Mm-hmm.
Shall we go to question 3?
Yeah. Cyber.
Yeah, another one that didn't have its own question last year. So the question reads, how confident are you that your cyber insurance covers the financial risk in your data governance? And from the answers, we see that a really remarkable 66% of our public finance leaders have responded that they are aware and confident of their cyber insurance policies. And that's an amazing evolution in cybersecurity awareness. In last year's survey, cybersecurity was not even identified as a top 3 concern. Tom, when you and I were talking about the original survey results for this year, I think you had a really concerning thought with respect to the confidence that our leaders had in their cybersecurity insurance, and maybe take a moment and provide some context around that concern.
Yeah, I think that first of all, I think that the risk, well, let me make a couple of other points. I think what the first leading up to this is that I think that now that we're into 2025, I think many or most folks are just aware of the increased risk of potential cyber attacks, and not just cyber attacks from perpetrators who are trying to, like a ransomware or a situation where they're trying to shut down, take control of systems in order to get paid, but also the potential for havoc-based attacks, right? So I think that folks are more aware of this risk, which I think is a positive. But one of the other things I think that as the number of attacks that we've seen over the last couple of years, as that has evolved, I think that on the one hand, I think that having a cyber policy is important, but making sure that folks understand all of the specifics that are involved and covered in that policy are also important. It's been important from a credit perspective. I know that that's something that investors and rating agencies are looking at on a very regular basis, but also just from a practical standpoint, the way that I think about it, Yaffa, is I know that when individuals buy just homeowners insurance, oftentimes there are certain things that they think are included and or know are included. And for example, sometimes flood insurance the insurance doesn't necessarily cover a certain flooding disasters, right? So I think that folks need to make sure that they're aware and they go over the specifics of their policy with the policy providers. And I'm going to mention that there are folks at Hilltop, the Hilltop insurance group that can help folks at public entities and public finance leaders go through some of those specifics. So one of the things that, in the survey results, we included a link to the folks at the Hilltop insurance section. And so if folks are interested in getting more information about that and reaching out to them, they can do that. But I think that doing a review and going over the policy specifics is something that's very, very important right now.
If you have a good cyber insurance policy, do you need employee training?
Well, most cyber folks will say that employee training is probably going to be one of the most important things that an organization can do to protect itself, because that is one of the ways that perpetrators will try to get into a system, is they will try to psychologically fool someone through an email or a phone call or it happens through text messages now as well, right? So it doesn't replace. It really enhances what it is that enhances the protections that organizations have.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I just think it's super interesting to see the significant confidence that the leaders have in their cyber policies. But I can't underscore sufficiently what Tom mentioned. Two things. One is really understanding what your insurance policy covers and frankly what it does not, and resources that we can provide you with at Hilltop to help you understand that.
Yeah.
And then finally, just underscoring the need just to stay vigilant. We are all doing it in all of our respective chairs, and just continue to encourage that despite, the multitude of training modules that I know that we within Hilltop, as well as our public leaders, have in their respective seats and chairs.
Yeah.
Maybe we should head over to the next question, number 4. Awesome. Okay, so the next question is, assuming that cryptocurrency is permitted, do you agree that cryptocurrency is a viable investment option for public entities to diversify earnings? And so what's super interesting to me, and Tom made the comment earlier with respect to the question number 1, this is another item that would never have hit the radar screen in 2018, and certainly it now has its own question devoted to it in 2025. Well, the response is, not surprising. Only 10% of our responders agree that crypto is a viable investment option for public entities. To compare, a very, very significant 57% of our responders do not believe that crypto is an appropriate option for public entities. Tom, I know you published an article on this very topic. So before I share any of my own perspectives, perhaps you might want to jump in and share your publication and some of the conclusions that you've made.
Yeah, this is something that I think is really, really important, and also really plays into that theme of items that weren't necessarily as much on the radar of folks in the public sector. Um, there's a piece that I published at the end of last year titled "Crypto Abstinence: Safeguarding Public Entity Credit Quality, Taxpayer and Public Funds by Avoiding Digital Illusions." And the reason that I felt that it was so important to write this, I want to say it was maybe November of last year, middle to the end of November. And it seemed as though after the presidential election, the fury or interest about crypto really started to increase. And I published this piece because I saw an interview of someone. Someone was on one of the financial channels, and this person said that folks at federal, state, and local government levels should start to get involved in crypto before it's too late. And it's something that concerned me. I mean, just to be frank, it concerned me. And I'm gonna read word for word a few of the things that I wrote here, just because I think it's very important to stress them. I wrote, investing in cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin involves significant risk, and this level of risk is not typically appropriate for public entities. And cryptocurrencies do not meet the most fundamental investment and risk management principles, and that cryptocurrencies, their valuations are often very, very volatile, and they lack intrinsic value and are not backed by tangible assets, right? So that is directly from the piece that we put out at the end of last year. My opinion has not changed on that, despite the fact that in some cases cryptocurrency valuations have increased since then. I'm not denying that, but also the things that I just said haven't changed either. If anything, I think that it's important for folks on the public entity side to realize that if they don't. That being said, Yaffa, based on the results from this survey question, I think most of the folks on the public entity side do get that, right? So that was actually one of the things that made me feel better about this topic where public entities are concerned.
Yeah, and I think that was a very important takeaway, Tom. I fully appreciate your comments, and frankly, the currency of your 4Q 2024 research. If you wrote it today, it sounds to me like your words would be basically identical. Maybe this is a great one to throw through Copilot and rebrand it for 2025 and see how long it'll take you to get that out the door.
I think an important point though is that even acknowledging the fact that some of the pricing it's attractive. I mean, the pricing is attractive. I get that. I don't want to deny that the pricing is not attractive. The problem is that the volatility is very, very high, right? So and also the pricing isn't necessarily backed by tangible assets, right? So that's one of the other things.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, public service leaders have a fiduciary responsibility to their constituents to ensure that money carefully earned and carefully saved is ultimately available for the residents of today and frankly tomorrow. And certainly there is the opportunity to get higher levels of return than perhaps something that's a little bit more conservative, but the risk profile is also probably inconsistent with where we would expect our public service leaders to be investing. And for those that have investment policies, whether it leads to, their day-to-day operating dollars or their dollars that are in reserve from bond issues, it's probably not the highest and best use for that investment. Okay, maybe let's head to question number 5.
Yeah.
To what extent is your public entity prioritizing disaster risk reduction and resilience planning? And what we thought was super interesting is 53% of respondents said that disaster risk reduction and resilience planning were a top or high priority for their entity. On the other side, only 2% claimed it was not a priority at all. And in our assessment, the survey reflects the growing institutional commitment to mitigating disaster impacts and enhancing community preparedness across the country. It's really interesting, but if you click on the Florida response here, you'll notice that 78% of responders in Florida actually placed resilience in the top or high priority more than the other states that were broken out in this particular question. And Tom, I know that you've done significant research on this topic.
Yeah.
What thoughts do you have, both as it relates to the importance of resiliency, but maybe also to the Florida breakout that we're seeing in this answer?
So it doesn't surprise me at all that we're seeing these results in Florida, especially because of over the last kind of decade, one of the things that we've been experiencing and seeing, you experience this firsthand oftentimes, right? Because of where it is that you're located. I mean, you're right smack dab there. And when there are storms and or hurricanes that are coming through that part of the country during hurricane season, it's something that it doesn't just appear as though the impact from those storms is much more severe. The impact from those storms has been much more severe, right? And so this is one of the reasons of why it is that rising insurance costs is throughout the country, and especially places like California and Florida, places that are that have very large exposures to the oceanfront. These are areas that, California is a little less, but there's still a lot of concern about it. Well, I shouldn't say concern. It looks as though they're saying that it's a high priority. So there might be concern, but that it seems as though that concern is evolving into public entities placing a high priority on taking steps to go through risk mitigation procedures, right? And so one of the things that it's not going to surprise me if and when over the next couple of years we continue to see the same kind of or even a increased level of impact from weather related and or climate related issues in places, and not just places, I guess I said places that are located near the oceans, but even places that are places along the Mississippi River, for example, and or places around maybe the Delaware River in the northeast part of the United States. I mean, there are other places, places that are located near the Great Lakes and on the Great Lakes. I mean, there are going to be an increased number of places that over the next couple of years, I think, are going to continue to place a high priority on this. So I don't think that the numbers in this category are going to be going down. I think they're going to continue to. I think that this is something that folks are going to continue to place an increased level of priority on over the next couple of years. And I think that it's something that I know that there are a lot of public entities that are talking about this and doing it. And I know that there are a lot of investors that are interested to see this and see how this shapes going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think your points are exactly right. Resiliency. When I started my career at a rating agency close to 30 years ago, this wasn't a question. We didn't know what resiliency meant, other than if you were talking about a person and their attitude, as opposed to the environment and infrastructure. And now we've seen how the question of resiliency has found its way into informing credit ratings, as well as informing investor purchase decisions. So I do encourage readers that are interested in learning more is also to take a peek at the U.S. Government Accountability Office 2025 report, which really lists and talks a little bit more about some of the funding efforts that we've seen in FEMA, EPA, and the USDA, and they've collectively invested over 64 billion in grants and loans between 2014 and 2023 to support water and sewer infrastructure resilience, and obviously significant billions being invested to protect other infrastructure elements of this country. So it's a topic that will continue to gain in importance. I know that we are actually in mid-September and hurricane season extends for another month. So I hope and I pray for all of our listeners across the country, wherever they may be, that the rest of the season takes them safely through without very little environmental issues. But again, it's a topic that we could talk about for hours that will remain front and center for our public leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe we should head to question number 6. Okay, so number 6, if you were to issue debt next year, what would be your top priority? Choose your top 2. We gave our readers 13 choices here to choose among, and the answers that we saw coming in as the top 2 would be either municipal buildings or general capital improvement, and water and sewer. And then we saw roads and bridges and public safety essentially tied for 3rd and 4th. I do want to point out, as we continued our conversation with respect to disaster risk and resiliency, I'll note for you that in Texas and in Florida, water and sewer, which was generally number 2 for the rest of the country, were number 1. So with that idea, Tom, what do you have to say about that?
I think that this is definitely not just a regional, but this is definitely from a local perspective, it's going to depend. It's going to depend on the region, the state, the geography of what and growth patterns, demographic patterns. I think so. It doesn't surprise me that the makeup of this question changes state to state, because I think that's just the nature of infrastructure. I think that's one of the reasons of why it is that the municipal bond tax exemption works so well. It allows the flexibility for public entities, and especially down to an individual school district or down to a town or a city, to be able to fund the infrastructure that works for them. One of the things that I would say about this is I'm surprised that energy is so low on this. I'm going to make a prediction, Yaffa. I bet this is going to be higher next year. Mark, let's revisit that next year. I bet energy's higher. I don't know if it's going to be in the top 3 or 4, but energy is going to be higher.
Well, it can't be lower, so I would agree with you on that. But I also agree.
That's true. It can't be lower. That's true. You're right.
It is a little bit of a surprise that it did come in
so low.
So low. It did. Yeah. But I kind of feel that to some, right, energy is a given, right? That we're going to have energy, and therefore, if it's a given and we're going to have energy, then we need to focus on water, sewer, roads and bridges, public safety, and schools. But now, for example, if we would have had this survey after Winter Storm Uri, and we would have polled Texans on this answer, I would absolutely bet that we would have seen this, maybe in the top. I would probably see it, before economic development, which obviously is a laudable and important goal. So some of it is, where is the leader's mind and philosophy at this
Yeah.
point. What's the squeakiest wheel squeaking about, so to speak? And when is the timing of this particular survey coming out? And if it's coming out in a time in which energy is predominant in front of people's news, and we're seeing energy costs skyrocketing, where that places on this on the poll is certainly going to be informed by that. But given where we are right now with a certain element of stability, both as it relates to the power grid, as it relates to prices, as it relates to gas, it doesn't surprise me that it comes here, but I think this one's a volatile one, and it'll be volatile for a bunch of reasons. One, headline risk; two, costs; and three, this is something that drives our entire economy, and therefore its importance could never be underestimated.
Right.
Okay, we're heading into our seventh and final insightful question. This is a question that we talked a lot internally about whether or not we were going to utilize this question, and then if so, how do you word this type of question in a way to elicit the best information? So question 7 reads, would your entity be willing to charge more for improved infrastructure? And ultimately, and you've heard us talk all along about the recognition that our infrastructure is aging, and it being a clear priority for public entities. But the survey suggests that there's a real tug of war, if you will, more than a healthy tension among public entity officials to raise rates or tolls to fund improved infrastructure. I think we all recognize the fact that we need improved infrastructure, but we similarly recognize that there's a constraint in terms of where public support is, and where the resistance point is in order to pay for that improved infrastructure. We know that the American Society of Civil Engineers gave American infrastructure a grade C in the 2025 infrastructure report card. We know that this is an improvement over the C- that it had previously received. But Tom, what do you say about this tension, if you will, between paying more, or the desire to pay more, or for better infrastructure, and most leaders' inability to raise those taxes to effectuate that result?
So the thing that comes to mind is over the last kind of 10 to 15 years, there have been folks on the public entity side and on the investor side who have asked me, especially when I'm talking about my issuance forecast, my municipal bond issuance forecast for the past year, upcoming year, I've oftentimes gotten the question of what is it specifically that could help drive issuance higher? And the two things that I have continually said for the past decade plus: number one, higher economic growth more consistently. Number one. Number two, higher tax revenues and or fees, which is what this question is getting at, that could be then used to pay for bond issuance and or infrastructure investment. And one of the reasons of why it is that the American Society of Civil Engineers grade went up is because over the last couple of years, we've seen a couple of record years of municipal bond issuance. Now, I would say that issuance hasn't really increased as much as many would have thought and or would have liked to have seen. But I think that that's one of the reasons of why issuance hasn't really risen that significantly, is because state and local governments and public entities really, for the most part, try to hold down their spending. And the answers to this question helps illustrate, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Yaffa, but it helps illustrate one of the reasons of why it is that public entities look at issuance activity in this way. It's because now, on the one hand, economic growth has been a little higher over the last year or two than it was in the last decade, for example. And I would say that there's been a little more positive momentum over the last year or two from a fiscal perspective. That being said, when I see an answer like this, that tells me that it also means that issuance might not be rising as fast as what some folks might like, if that makes sense.
No, I think that makes tremendous sense. I think we could recognize that 2024 resulted in approximately 20% increase in bond issuance in the municipal space, and 2025 is tracking similarly. And as a result, there's certainly been significant investment in all of our infrastructure. And by that, I mean school district buildings, hospitals, water, sewer, electric systems, airports, you name it, and there's been investment in it. All investment's not equal, and all investment is not only equal with respect to the sectors, but equal with respect to regions and states, and therefore an issue in one state may be less or more of an issue than compared to another state. This is another issue that's going to continue to rise in its importance with respect to our public leaders. And I'd also posit here that had we offered this survey in a time in which there was more significant headline news associated with some of our infrastructure and some of our infrastructure issues, perhaps, I don't know, but I'd like to think perhaps that there may have been a little bit more comfort with respect to answering that a little bit more money can be charged to help our infrastructure. And there's always going to be that yo-yo effect, right? There's going to be an issue at a port, at a stadium, on a road, on a power grid. And then after that issue, you'll have a situation in which residents will be more favorably inclined to pay more. And then once that crisis has passed, maybe a year or two later, we go back to the more status quo, which is more reflective of what we see in Q7. There's that healthy push and pull between infrastructure needs and infrastructure savings. But right now, the biggest issue that we continue to see, because it is the front and center for a public finance leader, is really making sure that they have the labor and the funds to provide essential services to their constituents. And it's just interesting to see that we've kind of led off with that question. We've talked about some real specific issues that our public finance leaders are seeing, but at the end of the day, it's really going to be a reflection upon, what the constituency needs and what that public finance leader is expected to provide. So it's been really exciting to come up with these questions, to get the feedback, to work with Tom and the rest of the Hilltop team in coming up with the survey results. And we really appreciate your time for listening to us with these questions and with the insights and with the context that Tom's been able to provide to us. Tom, were there any other closing comments that you wanted to share before we say goodbye to the audience today?
There's a final thing that I wanted to say. I wanted to say thank you to two specific groups. First of all, I want to say thank you, Yaffa, to you and all of the other folks at Hilltop who helped make this possible, because there were many, many other folks who, we started working on this 6-7 months ago with a pretty big group of people who they're not the ones that are on this video talking about the results, but the results would not have come back in this way if it wasn't for their hard work. So I want to say thank you to you and all the other folks at Hilltop who helped put this together, number one. And number two, I want to say thank you also to the over 1,000 public entity, public finance leaders who participated in this, because they're the big reason of why it is that you and I are able to talk about it, right? So thank you very much everyone for participating, and we hope you participate next year as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Hilltop Talks podcast today. For those interested, you can also see the recent Hilltop Securities economic and municipal commentary and listen to our podcasts by going to HilltopSecurities.com/commentary, and you can follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thanks again. We look forward to bringing you more color in the future related to topics that intersect the world of politics, finance, and public finance. This has been Tom Kozlik from Hilltop Securities.